Do you want to lose weight but struggle to stay committed to a meal plan because you constantly feel hungry? Does food provide you with comfort when you are bored, angry, lonely, or sad? If so, you are in the right place. My name is Kristen Jones, and I'm a life coach specializing in emotional eating and weight loss, and I'm also a lifelong emotional eater. I want to provide you with information, motivation, and support so you too can learn to manage your issues with food and develop a healthy relationship with yourself. Welcome to the Breakthrough Emotional Eating Podcast. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Breakthrough Emotional Eating Podcast. My name is Kristen Jones, and as always, I am so happy to be here with you and to have you all present for a very special episode of the podcast, because today we have what I like to say, the man, the myth, Dr. Ron Eaker from Augusta, Georgia, and he is going to be answering questions, as I like to say, all things menopause. So you are not going to want to miss this. So in today's episode, you're going to learn, if you don't know about hot flashes and you want to know, you are going to learn it. All about hot flashes, the menace that they are and how to deal with them, about specific hormonal changes that happen to women in menopause and how to handle them. Foods that women in menopause should or should not be eating, and possible treatments that women can use to combat the symptoms of menopause and, kind of just get their lives back to, kind of where they want it to be. If you are listening and you are listening to the podcast and you aren't a member of the Breakthrough community, please, I encourage you to come and join us, www.facebook.com/groups/food breakthrough. And please come and be a part of what I think, maybe I'm a little prejudiced. I have to say, Dr. Eaker has an amazing community as well. He has a Facebook group as well, which we will be talking about. But I think my Facebook group is pretty amazing as well. And it's an amazing community of just super supportive people supporting each other through issues with emotional eating as well as weight loss. And we would love to have you be a part of the community. So please come and join us. As you know, every week we do a member shout out. So member shout out this week is going to go to Laura Rose. And Laura, I'm going to just hammer your name here. Savakalis. Savakalis? I had it, but when I said it before, it sounded perfect. And I just want to recognize you, Laura, as being somebody who you are always there to boost people up when they post. You're giving inspirational messages in comments and just providing a lot of just positivity throughout the group. It was a pleasure to meet you last week on our meetup that we did last Thursday. But and I've gotten to speak to you before, but it's just really a pleasure to have you in the group. I love having you there. Thank you so much for what you do and what you bring to the group in just your attitude, your positivity, and just keep being you and keep being a part of the group. So again, thank you so much for everything that you do and you bring to the group. So I really appreciate that. So again, we're off to the man of the hour, Dr. Ron Eaker. Dr. Ron, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Kristen. Thank you for allowing me to share this time with you. And I wanted to say a special thanks to your community for putting up with my rescheduling and my time changes and all the things that they've dealt with. I know that there's a lot of joy in habit. And when someone disrupts that normal pattern, I can understand that creates an issue. So thanks to them for being patient, and thanks to you for tolerating me and putting up with my crazy schedule.
You are so worth it. And I told the community, I said, he's so worth it. I will do whatever it takes to get him on the show. So can you tell the Breakthrough community a little bit about yourself and about about you personally, as well as your practice that you run, and a little bit about how you and I connected?
Sure. I've been in practice now, general OB/GYN, for 32 years. Stopped doing the OB portion, stopped delivering babies about 3 years ago. And that really opened up a whole new window for me with regards to how I wanted to deliver care and the types of things I wanted to do. For a number of years, I've been a big practitioner of what I would call a integrative approach to medicine, taking the best of what we would refer to as traditional approaches and combining that with complementary approaches and really giving women choices when it comes to their health care. Menopause has been a special interest of mine for years. Back in 97, I published a book called Holy Hormones, and then republished it a few years later with some revisions called A Woman's Guide to Hormone Health. So this has been an area that I've been fascinated with over the years and have worked with literally thousands of women, specifically as it relates to menopause. Now, got especially interested in weight, again, probably about 3 years ago when I stopped OB. As you probably know, and most of your folks that have had children or been in that situation know that that's a pretty time-intensive issue, having babies, and it's pretty time-intensive for the obstetrician too, because they're usually up at 3 in the morning. You know, God has a sense of humor. He created labor to start at 2 and 3 in the morning on average for most of us. So once I stopped doing OB, that freed up a lot of my physical time and my mental time to be able to focus on some different aspects of women's health care in particular. And I noticed that, consistent with statistics, about 70% of folks in my practice were overweight or obese. Mm-hmm. And I realized that that was an amazing area that I could influence that would really begin to impact legacy, not only for themselves, but as you well know, the impact it can have on family, the impact that it can have on generations, really, if you begin to address underlying issues that are related to weight and weight management. So I went back, which maybe wasn't a smart thing to do at 60, went back and got board certified in bariatric medicine. Sitting down and taking another test for a board certification is not something I normally recommend as a senior citizen, but it was a wonderful experience. Learned more about nutrition in that training than I ever even came close to learning in medical school. One of the biggest problems associated with medical training today, as I'm sure you've run across through the years and doing the work you do, is that most doctors get about 2 weeks worth of nutritional training in their medical school. And then anything that they get beyond that is largely self-taught unless they decide to go back and do something such that I did. So that's kind of a quick synopsis of where I came from and why I'm doing the things I'm doing now. So my practice now is largely office gynecology and weight management, and with a special expertise in perimenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal issues.
There you go, ladies. He's our man. He's our man. He's got the answers. So the way that Dr. Ron and I connected was his daughter has a podcast, and she reached out to me when I first wrote my book, When Food Is Your Drug. And if you're in the group, you know that you have gotten offered a digital copy of that. And if you aren't in the group, you want to come to the group because I will give you a free copy of my book. And so I was on her podcast, and was it about maybe 4 or 5 months ago that you heard the podcast episode? Oh, uh-oh, Dr. Ron, did we lose you? Uh-oh, did you freeze? Oh, okay. Well, anyway, I will continue on. So we actually met, and hopefully he'll be able to come back on. I don't know how that got. Okay. Oh well. We actually met, and he asked, oh, it's just me now. Okay, well, I'll wait for him to come back on. So anyway, we met, and he contacted me because he had heard my podcast about my book, and he wanted, because of his specialty in bariatrics and in having a weight loss clinic, he had let me know that he did not have the bandwidth nor the staffing to be able to address issues with emotional eating. And so he and I kind of started just a little bit of a consultation, kind of a consultation business back and forth with him being able to direct people who were in his practice, who had come in to lose weight, but had pretty specific issues with, he just lost connection, with with emotional eating. So I have been able to happily, work with some of his clients as well. Let me see if he can get back in. All right. Well, we will see what happens here. So, anyway, like I said, he specializes in menopause and again, as he said, perimenopausal and postmenopausal issues. Hoping he's going to be able to jump back in. Let me try and make this happen for him. This is so much fun. Hold on, guys. Let's see. Okay. Hopefully he'll be able to come back in. Let's see what happens. So anyway, we'll keep talking here. So, as you all know, and I know that the questions, we got some really, really good questions. And we talked with the questions that we're going to be addressing today, as I had said in the, here he comes again. As I had said in the intro, so we're going to be talking about hot flashes, and he's back.
I don't know if that was I just heard some sirens outside, so I'm wondering if something just disrupted our connection, if that was me or you, but
let's blame it on that.
I went on plant B, so I'm now connected through my phone, so hopefully that works just as well.
There we go.
You gotta love modern technology.
Absolutely. All right, so let's jump into, I finished our story. Let's jump into the questions that the ladies had asked. So the first one was, what is it with the hot flashes? What is that all about? Why? How do you combat it?
Hot flashes are probably the number one symptom associated with menopause. And it really is almost, I won't say universal, but statistics say up to 70% of women will experience hot flashes to one degree or another. And the real key there is frequency and intensity. The hypothalamus, the little nut-shaped organ in the middle of the brain, is the temperature regulator of the body. And it's very sensitive to fluctuations in estrogen levels. And as most of your folks know, estrogen is the key female hormone, and that's what declines during menopause. So it's that drop in estrogen that signals this temperature center in the hypothalamus to go wacky, and that's what triggers the hot flashes. And it actually is literally a change in skin temperature. You can actually measure the skin temperature, and it's the dilation of the blood vessels that are around the upper neck and the face that causes the actual flushing that tends to be associated with that. So number one, they're very real. Number two, they're common. They're based in physiology. It's not imaginary. It's not in your head. But the real key for folks that are listening is what to do about those. And it's really all based on the degree of symptoms. For some women, they may occur just one a day, one every 3 or 4 days. Some not at all. Believe it or not, there are actually women out there who never have a hot flash. But for some women, they can be literally nonstop. They can be constant. They can be tremendously embarrassing in certain situations. They can be very bothersome, especially if they occur in the evenings, which tends to be the most dramatic time for many at night, especially when it starts disrupting sleep. So it's not something to be just ignored. Yes, you can tolerate it and live with them if they're relatively mild. But generally, I tell folks that if they are bothersome enough to warrant some type of intervention, then in most cases, it's very worthwhile looking at what those options are, especially if it's to the point of being more than an annoyance, such as disrupting sleep patterns. And then you know how important sleep is in weight, for example. We know that getting adequate rest is critical to being able to lose weight and maintain weight. And one of the most common disruptors of sleep and quality sleep, adequate REM sleep, et cetera, in the menopause is hot flashes. So it was interesting too, men can have hot flashes.
Really?
But there's a certain situation that has to rise. Years ago, when men would have prostate cancer, one of the treatments was using estrogen.
Mm.
We don't use that anymore, but they would use estrogen for a couple of months. And then when they'd stop the estrogen, they'd have hot flashes.
Interesting.
So there's a few guys out there who can relate to you folks. I'm not one of them, but there's a few out there who can. But it just illustrates that it's that drop in estrogen that triggers the changes in the brain.
Mm-hmm. And so what would your recommendation be? I mean, it sounds like it's more of just management of the symptoms, because you can't really, you can't control what the hypothalamus is going to do. So what would you suggest to somebody who finds them problematic?
Yeah, the first is understanding that there are options. And for most women, I break it down very simply into 4 buckets. And it's easy to think of it and categorize it that way in looking at what options. Now, when you decide which of these buckets you delve into, then you get into the individualization. You get into the importance of looking at each person's past history, their current history, other medications, other medical issues. So it really becomes very individualized. One of the things that I stress about treatment of hot flashes or any menopausal symptoms is that you can't cookbook it. There's not one standard, one size fits all. You really have to look at each person's particular needs and tailor the choices. But in general, these 4 buckets are, one would be what we would call traditional hormones. Mm-hmm. A classic example of that would be Premarin, which a lot of people are familiar with. It's been around since the 1950s. Many people also characterize this as being synthetic hormones, and we'll get into a little differentiation between natural and synthetic, but that's one bucket that I would include. The second bucket is what I would call the bioidentical hormones, and that simply means hormones that are identical to what your ovaries would normally produce. If you had a woman and you reached in and grabbed an ovary and squished it up and looked at the hormones, and then you squished up one of these tablets and looked at the hormones, they'd be the same thing. Okay. So that's a subtle difference, but an important difference. These are still prescription medicines. Mm-hmm. The third bucket is what I call the nutraceuticals. And that's largely over-the-counter products that are things that are similar in how they treat the symptoms, but they're not hormones. These are largely vitamins, herbs, plants that have been independently tested and shown to be beneficial in treating symptoms in particular, like the hot flashes. Mm-hmm. And then the fourth category are what we would call the prescription medicines non-hormones, meaning that there's a number of different medications that are on the market, largely for other reasons, that treat other conditions. But we found through experience and through testing can actually help with hot flashes. Probably the best example in that group is the medicines known as the SSRI medicines, the family that contains things like Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, Celexa, Effexor, that family of medicines. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of an interesting history behind how we discovered that those medicines helped with hot flashes. Now, you normally wouldn't make that kind of association of an antidepressant treating hot flashes. Mm-hmm. But years ago, when luckily we've gotten very, very good at treating breast cancer, and breast cancer now has a survival rate over 95% for most individuals. But we were beginning to see younger and younger women that it was being detected and they were being successfully treated. But as a result of a lot of these treatments, they would either have their ovaries had been removed or been on chemotherapy or radiation that made the ovaries non-functional. So essentially, we were seeing a lot of women in their 30s who were suddenly menopausal because of their treatment for breast cancer. Mm. Well, obviously, they're not going to be a category of women who are going to use hormones because of the known risk associated there. Mm-hmm. So they were kind of left out in the cold. They didn't really have a whole lot in the way of options, and they were having horrible hot flashes. I mean, it's terrible, terrible, because they had a very rapid decrease in their estrogen, mm-hmm. largely due to these treatments. Mm-hmm. So some person a lot brighter than me years ago noticed that women who were on, in this particular case, it was Prozac for depressive symptoms, didn't seem to have the same level of hot flashes as other patients that they were observing who weren't on that medicine. So that was kind of an observed phenomenon that doctors began looking at and decided that they wanted to test that independently. So actually found that through independent tests looking just at its use in hot flashes were shown that most of the medicines in that family actually do have a beneficial effect on hot flashes. So these women were getting much better relief without the increased risk secondary to the estrogen use.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is an example of somebody being very bright and observant, and turns out to be a great tool for those who choose to go down that route. And the way it works, just very simply, is we know that there's a connection between estrogen and serotonin, which is the brain hormone associated with moods and emotions. That's why, by the way, women who undergo any type of large hormonal shift, whether it's childbirth or PMS or menopause, even during the normal menstrual cycle with PMS and puberty, you'll oftentimes as a component of the symptom spectrum will be mood and emotional changes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because there's a relationship between estrogen and serotonin and how they're metabolized. So it wasn't that it was just some kind of magical antidepressant effect. It actually related to the way the estrogen and the serotonin fit together. So with each one of those four buckets, there are multiple pros and cons. There's multiple rationales for using one over another. And it really is a matter of partnering with your healthcare provider and exploring those and coming in as a partner and having someone who will listen to you, because MD does not stand for a menopause director. It is, you are there as a partner to help folks answer questions, steer, provide insight, but really it's incumbent on each individual to take some responsibility and listen to great podcasts like this so they can get some knowledge and know how to go in and discuss things with their docs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's exactly why we're doing this, is because I want people to have that really important information. So in the way of hot flashes, how long, because this was a question that I got from one of my clients, and actually who I reached out to you about, was having hot flashes like 10, 15 years after menopause. She'd already gone through menopause. So is that just the hypothalamus, the change in estrogen and the hypothalamus just gets kicked off again?
Yeah, it really goes back to that concept of individualization, because everyone's menopausal experience is unique. And even looking at what a close relative experienced, a mother, a sister, a grandmother, there's not a close correlation predicting what your experience will be like. So 60% of women in their 60s will still have hot flashes. Most of the time we think about the symptoms of menopause surrounding the time frame of menopause itself, when the average age in the US today is about 51. Mm-hmm. So most of the symptoms, especially the intensity of the symptoms, tend to be centered around that time frame. But there are a significant number of folks whose symptoms will persist over a period of time. And even there are some individuals who will, for example, have some pretty intense hot flashes, and then maybe they start waning after a few years, and occasionally may experience something, and then placed in a stressful scenario, all of a sudden they come back with a vengeance. Okay. So we know there are some triggers, for example, like stress is a classic trigger for hot flashes. So each person has to kind of see where they are historically, but the unfortunate truth is there is a significant number of folks who will continue on with some symptoms even past what we would consider the menopausal time frame.
Okay. All right. I think that's a kind of it's a relief, but it's also, I think it'll make people feel like, okay, this is just part of that whole process, that them coming back in their 60s is part of it.
Well, the other thing that I want to add to that, and I think it's a very important caveat, is there are other things that can cause hot flashes.
Oh.
So we tend to, and in fact, let me back up the truck just a little bit farther, and making sure folks understand exactly what a hot flash is that's related to hormones. Typically, it is a very, very sudden onset of a flushing sensation, usually begins in the upper chest and then kind of gallops up to take over your head, oftentimes followed by some sweating. And it's usually a very, I mean, just what it says, a hot flash, a hot flush. It's a very rapid onset, rapid decline. That is to be differentiated from someone who says, you know, I'm just hot natured. I'm always warm. I'm in the room and I'm always the hottest in the room. Or I get out of the shower in the morning and I'm still sweating. That's probably not really a hormone associated hot flash. So it's very important that people, number one, make that distinction. And then number two, understand that there are other things that can trigger classic hot flashes. The best example is thyroid problems, which is very, very common in women, extremely common. And someone who has an overactive thyroid, hypothyroidism, or who is on thyroid medicine for low thyroid, but the medicine may be too much, either one of those scenarios can actually be a classic trigger of hot flashes. We have some people who have sweats due to hypoglycemia. Their blood sugar drops too low. And being in nutrition and in food, you understand that sometimes high sugar meals will trigger a spike in insulin that just kind of overshoots and your blood sugar drops low, and you get hypoglycemic, and you can get a similar type of experience that some people see with hot flashes. So it's important that, especially when hot flashes occur outside of kind of the normal time frame that you would expect, just to make sure that there's not anything else going on, because the treatment would be most likely very different in that instance.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So moving on to foods. Have you heard of any sort of foods or anything that women in menopause should be eating, should not be eating? Should it just be a regular healthy diet? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the baseline there, of course, is a regular healthy diet. I think when you look at the overall health, we know that there are a number of underlying medical issues that can certainly complicate and aggravate the symptoms of menopause. So certainly a basic, good, balanced nutritional approach is appropriate across the board. Specifically, as it relates to menopause, we have very good evidence that soy and soy products can be very helpful with regards to hot flashes in particular, and some other menopausal symptoms. So things like tempeh and miso and certainly soybean products. Now, that doesn't include soy sauce. I always have to make that distinction. Soy sauce is not a good soy product to help you with hot flashes. It'll make you blow up like a blowfish because of all the salt in it. So you've got to be careful along those lines when you're looking at that. Certainly, there are a lot of herbs that people use as flavorings that can be helpful. Things like black cohosh. We know that eating primrose oil is very helpful. We know that some of the omega-3 fatty acids and high nuts and seeds that contain a lot of the antioxidants can be helpful with some menopausal symptoms. There's some evidence that some of the anti-inflammatory foods that have a lot of the omega-3s, for example, can be very beneficial in that respect also. We also know that, as I kind of alluded to earlier, a fluctuation in blood sugars can influence the intensity of some menopausal symptoms, especially some of the mood and emotional changes that happen in the perimenopausal time frame. So minimizing simple sugars, I used to be able to say that word. I stayed up for weeks trying to say that word all at once, but I try getting less of,
There
how's
you go.
that? Is that better? Getting less of the high glycemic carbohydrates that are going to jack up your blood sugar real rapidly. We know that those have been associated with a lot of issues with foggy thinking. That is another characteristic of some menopausal symptoms. So in general, trying to eat a balanced, low sugar, low saturated fat, high fiber. We know that fiber intake is very important in the menopause, not only because of the issues associated with aging and cardiovascular disease and the benefits that we know fiber can provide there, but there's some evidence that getting adequate both soluble and insoluble fiber in your diet can help modulate estrogen levels, can help minimize the fluctuation in estrogen levels. Mm-hmm. So it really does come down to the same mantra, the same caveats that you preach that I do when it comes to just a basic healthy nutritional intake is always your default.
Absolutely. What is the deal with pellets?
Pellets. I love talking about pellets. I had one lady say, she came in one day and said, "I'm ready for my little rabbit poop." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, but I don't do a lot of stuff with rabbit poop." And she, you know, those little pellet things. So I've never quite heard it called rabbit poop, but I guess they do kind of look like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Pellets are a good example of a mode of hormone replacement. Mm-hmm. There's nothing magical. This is a real misperception and myth. There's nothing magical about how the hormones get into one system. Yes, there are certain advantages and disadvantages when you're comparing taking something orally or something injected or something transdermal. Right. Pellets are basically small, literally look like little rabbit poop that you're placed under the skin. Mm-hmm. They are slowly absorbed so that they contain the bioidentical estradiol hormones, sometimes testosterone. Those are the two primary hormones that we use in pellets. And the real advantage is many women only need to get them once every 3 to 6 months. So it's a convenience factor. They're placed in the office in a very simple 2-minute procedure that places them in the fatty tissue in the abdomen or the buttocks where it's easily absorbed. Now, for many years, I would go around all over the country and we would be talking about different ways of administering hormones, and I would mention pellets. And I would get looks from my colleagues like I was from Mars. They had never heard of that. They didn't know what they were. Well, I come from a part of the country where some of the initial research done on pellet therapy for hormones was begun at the Medical College of Georgia back in the 50s. So we have been intimately familiar with that mode of administering hormones for many, many years. In fact, I remember my very first day of practice, my senior partner came in and said, "Would you put pellets in this lady?" And I said, "Well, I just went through 4 years of medical school and I've never done that." And from that day forward, I got very, very good at putting in pellets because he had people driving from 4 or 5 hours away to do that. But let me just say first that it's nothing special, magical, or safer, or in any way different than just a mode of administration. They've gained a certain degree of popularity just recently, literally in the last 6 months to a year, because a couple of commercial companies have gotten very excited about marketing these to quote unquote anti-aging physicians and medi-spas.
Right.
And my own personal bias is this is a huge mistake. I think it's going to create a lot of confusion and a lot of misuse. But that's why I think the public understanding of pellets has gained a lot more in the consciousness now, simply because of the marketing of these as some newfangled special way to get the hormones. I mean, we've been doing it 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing newfangled, and it's just as valuable a mode of administration as a tablet would be, or as a shot. And it's important that you know when to use them and when not to use them, because there's certain patients that I don't believe should be using pellets, but that's a whole nother discussion. But it's just a tool for getting the hormone into your system is essentially all it is.
Yeah. And wasn't it, I think what I always think about is, and I don't know if halfway through, because they last like 6 months, or is it 3 months?
3 to 6 months, and it really varies on a number of factors, whether, certainly the person's size can play a role because of how it's distributed in the bloodstream and absorbed. People who are under a lot of stress or have a lot of other illness during that time frame may burn them up a little quicker. So we do see that vary from time to time. But in general, all other factors being equal, most folks will be fairly consistent at how often they get them. Yeah. And it really varies from person to person.
Okay. Because I'm one of those people, I don't want anything. My thought would be, gosh, what if I took this in and then it didn't go well? Like, and then it's like, what do I do now? I have this stuff in me, and I do know people. Do they just have to write it out, or can they have it removed?
Theoretically, it can be removed, but my own experience, and having done this for many, many years, is that once they are placed, then within a relatively short period of time, they begin to, just for lack of a better word, disintegrate as part of the absorption process. So it's not like it's a little solid piece of something you can just go in and take out. Yeah. The whole purpose behind it is for it to become biodegradable and undetectable after a period of time. So to be able to go back in after a couple of weeks and be able to extract it is really not going to be able to be done. Now, that's opposed to some people may be familiar with some of the methods of birth control, in particular one called a Nexplanon, which is actually a little rubber celastic tube that's placed into the arm, and the hormones are absorbed from that tube, but the tube stays. Mm-hmm. And you go back in at the completion of that 3 or 5 years, whichever size you place, and you actually remove the tube. But that's not what happens with pellets. You actually have no matrix that stays intact there. So you're exactly right. Once it's in, it's pretty much in.
Yeah, you got to write it out.
You either love it or hate it.
Right.
So you just, yeah.
The last question, what happens to your metabolism during menopause? Is your metabolism at all impacted during menopause?
Great question. And that's one that I address almost every day, because that's something that we're constantly faced with, whether we're dealing with weight or we're dealing with just routine issues associated with aging. We know as you age, your basic metabolic rate declines. We know that the amount of energy that you are required to run your heart, your lungs, if you literally just laid still on the bed, the amount of energy required to keep you alive is a basic metabolic rate. Well, that declines as you age. Mm-hmm. So if it took 1,000 calories when you were 50, it might take 800 when you're 60. That's just a fact of physiology. Right. So unless you make certain changes to either vary your intake or increase your output or both, just from that alone, over time, a lot of folks will gain weight because the amount of energy expended is less. Right. And that certainly happens in the menopause. There's no question that you can't separate age from, it's largely an age-based phenomenon. Mm-hmm. So it's sometimes very difficult to differentiate the changes that we observe in metabolism from age versus actual hormone fluctuations. So that being said, there definitely is evidence that as you get into the menopause, there are changes in not only metabolism, but where fat is deposited, for example. As you go into menopause, we already mentioned that the estrogen level tends to decline. Well, the ovaries also produce testosterone. That's thought of as the male hormone.
Mm-hmm.
Not produced at the same level that it is in women or in men, but it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't really decline at the same rate. So in other words, a woman could still be producing testosterone well after she's stopped producing most of her estrogen. Well, what happens then in that menopause time frame, the ratio of estrogen to testosterone changes such that the ratio is relatively a higher testosterone level. Well, we know testosterone tends to cause, for example, deposition of fat centrally around the abdomen area. So we know that that's one of the things that traditionally women will experience in the perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause is increased abdominal fat deposition. And some of that may be due to that testosterone imbalance, if you will, relative to estrogen. We also know that estrogen itself can have an impact on hunger and appetite. Not what many people think. They used to think, oh, well, if I'm on hormones, I'm going to gain weight. Well, the reality is a drop in estrogen actually can trigger an increase in some of the appetite stimulating hormones.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually see women in the menopause who are taking forms of estrogen will actually have a lower weight gain because they don't have that same stimulation of the appetite from the drop in estrogen. Now that has to be balanced by the known fact that some women who take hormones will have fluid retention. So we know that that can contribute to relatively rapid shifts in weight. You know as well as I do, if somebody tells you they gained a pound overnight, it's
Right.
not a pound of fat, that's generally a pound of fluid.
Right.
And so that's what we see. So it's a complex dance in the menopause between age, between the hormones, between the ratio, the balance. And then you get into even more complex things like shifting of the microbiome in menopause. We see that changes in the vaginal pH and it changes the bacteria there. Well, we also see a shift in the gut bacteria. And we're learning more and more about how that can impact even energy absorption from certain food products and how that can change a person's metabolism. So you also know that as in the menopause, as you age, there tends to be other comorbidities, things like hypertension and diabetes and other types of cancers, all are associated with increasing age. So all those things certainly can impact the metabolism and the likelihood of weight gain. Unfortunately, very few of those help with weight loss. So that has to be a much more intentional thing. Most of these shifts during that menopausal, perimenopausal time frame tend to propel more towards energy excess and thus weight gain. So there's a very complex dance that occurs, and that's why it's not simple to give any blanket recommendations simply because each person has so many of their own factors that have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
But in general, I would, if I was going to make a general claim, I would say the majority of issues with weight gain in the menopause are actually more related to age than hormone effects.
Interesting. Huh. Okay. Well, that was a whole lot of information. That was a whole lot of science. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you taking the time to, and I learned a ton because I did not know the specifics of the hormones and especially with the hot flashes. That is super, super interesting. But what I really like, and this is what I've always liked about you, is that you don't go extreme one way or the other. You're very rational, and that's what I've always liked about you. And that really, we're all individuals, and we're all, we have to address things individually with that communication with our doctors, and really also, I mean, I think it's really important for, as a patient, to come in with some education yourself and doing your own, kind of doing your own research, and coming in and being an equal partner in the discussion about your own health.
Absolutely. I think the biggest healthcare crisis in this country today is not COVID. It's people not making healthy lifestyle choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. We so appreciate you being here. Can you just tell my listeners a little bit about your Facebook group?
Yeah, it's a private Facebook group because we felt very importantly that we maintain the privacy and the security associated with that, because we're dealing with a lot of issues, women's health issues, and primarily that can be very personal at times. So we felt like that was important. But it's called Women's Online Wellness. And if someone's interested, they can just go and search the groups. Be sure you search groups and not pages or just in general. Right. You'll need to go to the groups. And if you are a woman who enjoys taking control of her health care, that's the place for you. And you would just ask to join, and I'll look at it, and unless you're an axe murderer or somebody that a ne'er-do-well, we would love to have you a part of that. You can also just go to my personal website, which is just simply roneaker.com, and I think it has links to all those different things also. Mm-hmm. So we'd love to hook up. We've had a lot of folks on our Facebook page get in touch with Kristen and mm-hmm. work with you and kind of commingle our knowledge bases, and I think Absolutely. Have been of service to folks. So yeah. We greatly encourage continuing that interaction, because I think we have very complementary talents that I think will provide additional value to folks regardless of what their issue is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I always look forward to, on Thursdays, he has Thirsty Thursdays, which is his weekly. He goes live on Facebook. It's 3 p.m. Pacific Standard, 6 p.m. Eastern, and it's always entertaining. I have to say that Dr. Ron is never not entertaining. So you want to be
have fun.
He has, it is a fun group, and really is very, very attentive to answering questions, and just really, it's really helpful. It's a really great group. I'm a member as well. So it just definitely, if that's something that you're interested in, I know a couple of my members have asked about that, and I've sent them there as well. So we're going to wrap things up. So again, thank you everybody for joining us today. And thank you, Dr. Ron, for being here and answering those questions. It was so incredibly helpful. I'm going to go ahead and put in the show notes, in the podcast, I'll put a link to your group. And again, you can go to roneaker.com and connect with him there as well. And like I said, one of my favorite people. So he's the one I trust when it comes to all things. And if you want to know about COVID, we won't go there, but he knows a lot about that too. So he is very knowledgeable in COVID, and probably one of the only people I trust when it comes to COVID. So, but thank you so much for being here, Dr. Ron. I appreciate it. And everybody else, have a great Friday, a great weekend, and we will see you next week. Take care.